Marcus Sullivan's fingers traced the condensation on his empty whiskey glass, the amber residue clinging to the bottom like the exhaustion that had settled into his bones over the past 48 years. Finn's Irish pub hummed with Friday night energy around him. Voices layered over classic rock that had been old when he was young. But he sat alone at the bar's worn oak counter, grateful for the rare evening without obligation. Declan was safe with Harper, his sister handling bedtime routines with the ease of someone who understood 9-year-olds better than their own fathers sometimes did. The thought twisted something in his chest, but he pushed it down with practiced efficiency. The scent of jasmine cut through the pub's familiar musk of beer and wood polish before he registered the presence beside him. Elena Crawford materialized at his elbow, not in the tailored power suits that had become her armor over the past 2 years, but in dark jeans and a black blazer that made her look younger, almost vulnerable. Her auburn hair fell loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe knot. Those green eyes that could freeze a boardroom now carried something else entirely. Her hand found his shoulder warm through his worn flannel shirt. "Your tab is on me tonight, Marcus. On one condition, you let me take me home." The words hit him like cold water. Marcus straightened on his bar stool, the familiar space between employer and employee suddenly collapsing into something he couldn't name. 4 years of careful professional distance, of nodding in hallways, and polite exchanges about project timelines, and now this, his throat went dry. "What are you talking about?" Elena's fingers tightened briefly before releasing him, and when she met his eyes, the desperation there made his stomach drop. "Tomorrow I'm signing papers to sell Crawford Technologies. Your entire division will be eliminated within 90 days. Her voice cracked on the last word barely audible above the noise. "But tonight, Graham, I need to tell you something and about your wife." The mention of Nora sent ice through his veins. His wedding ring hung on a chain beneath his shirt, the metal warm against his sternum, and suddenly the crowded bar felt suffocating. Elena knew Nora's name. How? Why, the questions piled up faster than he could process them, but one fact cut through the confusion with brutal clarity. In 3 months, he'd be unemployed. Declan's medical bills already consumed most of his paycheck. The biologics his son needed weren't covered by insurance. Without this job, without the stability he'd clawed back over 4 brutal years, everything would collapse. Marcus forced himself to breathe, to think past the panic clawing at his throat. "Why tonight?" His voice came out rougher than intended, but Elena didn't flinch. If anything, she leaned closer, close enough that he caught the faint tremor in her hands before she clasped them together. "Because tomorrow everything changes, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see you, that I don't admire how you are as a father, as a man." The words rushed out like she'd been holding them too long. 4 years, Marcus. 4 years of professional boundaries, an appropriate distance, and I can't do it anymore. Not when... His phone shattered, the moment vibrating violently against the bar. Harper's name flashed on the screen. His sister never called this late unless something was wrong. Marcus grabbed it before the second ring. "Marcus." Harper's voice carried that specific pitch of controlled panic he'd learned to recognize in the months after Nora's diagnosis, when every phone call might bring news that crushed what little hope remained. "Declan can't breathe. His inhaler isn't working. The ambulance is on its way." The world narrowed to a single point of terrible focus. Marcus was moving before conscious thought caught up, his body operating on the muscle memory of too many emergency room visits, too many nights watching his son struggle for air while machines beeped their cold assessments. He barely registered Elena's hand on his arm, didn't process her words until she was steering him toward the door with surprising strength. "Let me drive. I know the head of pediatric pulmonology at Oregon Health and Science University." Every instinct screamed to refuse to maintain some shred of control over a situation spiraling wildly beyond his grasp. But Declan needed him, and Elena's sleek sedan was faster than his 15-year-old pickup, and pride meant nothing when measured against his son's oxygen levels. Marcus slid into the passenger seat, already dialing Harper back as Elena pulled into traffic with the confidence of someone used to commanding situations. "The ambulance just left." Harper's words tumbled over themselves. "He was fine at dinner, Marcus. We were reading about constellations, and then his lips started turning blue, and I couldn't." "I know. I'm coming." "Oh, it's just you." "Yes, Dr. Walsh is meeting us there. Elena's phone was already at her ear, her other hand steady on the wheel as she wove through downtown Portland's Friday night congestion with practiced ease. Marcus caught fragments of her conversation, the CEO voice he recognized from conference rooms now deployed with surgical precision. Brennan, I need a favor. My employee's son, 9 years old, severe asthma attack en route to OHSU. Yes, I know it's late. His name is Declan Sullivan. A pause, then softer. Please, this matters. The part of Marcus's mind not consumed by terror noted how Elena said, my employee with the same care most people reserved for family, how she knew exactly which strings to pull and wasn't hesitating to pull them. Gratitude and resentment warred in his chest. He'd spent 4 years building a reputation on merit, on the quality of his code, and the reliability of his work, and now his boss was calling in favors for his kid. It felt like charity. It felt necessary. It felt like everything he'd sworn never to accept after Nora died. The highway stretched before them, brake lights streaming red in the darkness. Elena drove with her jaw set, that vulnerability from the bar replaced by something harder, more focused. Marcus watched the city blur past and tried not to think about Declan's small body fighting for air, about the sound his son made when the attacks got really bad, about the medical bills that would follow this latest crisis. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before he could stop it rough with barely controlled fear. I'm just a soon-to-be unemployed software engineer who apparently isn't good enough to keep his job. Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white in the dashboard's glow. Because some things matter more than organizational charts and profit margins. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road, but her voice carried weight that had nothing to do with corporate authority. You taught me that without ever knowing it. The hospital rose ahead of them, all glass and steel and fluorescent urgency. Elena pulled up to the emergency entrance with the kind of aggressive parking that suggested she didn't care about tickets or towing zones. Marcus was out before the car fully stopped, his heart hammering against his ribs as he pushed through the automatic doors into antiseptic air and overhead announcements. Harper stood near the intake desk, her face pale, still wearing the cardigan she'd thrown on for their casual Friday evening together. They took him straight back. Dr. Walsh said she'd come find us. Harper's arms went around him briefly, her teacher's calm cracking just enough to show the fear underneath. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I should have. You did everything right. He squeezed her shoulder, then released her as Elena caught up to them, somehow managing to look both out of place and completely at home in the chaos of the ER waiting room. A woman in scrubs emerged from behind the intake desk, her expression professionally neutral, but her pace suggesting urgency. Family of Declan Sullivan. Marcus stepped forward, the words catching in his throat until Harper touched his back. I'm his father. Doctor. Walsh is with him now. His oxygen saturation was at 82% when the ambulance arrived, but we've got him stabilized on supplemental oxygen and nebulized medications. She'd like to speak with you once we move him to the pediatric ICU for observation. The relief lasted exactly as long as it took for Marcus to process the words ICU and observation. They meant serious. They meant expensive. They meant his son was sick enough to warrant intensive monitoring, and the insurance he'd be losing in 90 days was the only thing standing between him and financial catastrophe. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and followed the nurse through doors marked authorized personnel only, with Elena and Harper trailing behind. The pediatric ICU occupied its own wing walls, painted in cheerful colors that did nothing to soften the reality of children hooked to machines. Declan looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, oxygen cannula tucked under his nose, his dark hair so like Nora's damp against the pillow. His eyes were closed, chest rising and falling with the mechanical assistance that had become terrifyingly familiar over the past year. Marcus's hand found his son's, those small fingers warm and alive, and something in his chest unclenched just enough to let him breathe again. Mr. Sullivan? Dr. Brennan Walsh stood in the doorway, her strawberry blonde hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, wearing scrubs patterned with stars and planets that Declan would have loved under better circumstances. She'd treated his son 3 times before knew the history without needing to consult charts, and her expression carried the particular gravity of someone about to deliver news that wouldn't be welcomed. Declan's stable for now, but this is the 3rd attack in 6 months. The conventional treatments aren't keeping up with the severity of his asthma. She moved to the computer terminal, pulling up images and data that meant nothing to Marcus, but apparently told her everything she needed. There's a new biologic medication showing promising results in pediatric cases like his, but it's not yet approved by insurance companies for routine coverage. Out-of-pocket cost runs around $2,500 per month. The number hit like a physical blow. Marcus did the math automatically, years of single-parent budgeting, making the calculation instant and devastating. Even with his current salary, that kind of expense would mean choosing between medication and mortgage, between keeping his son breathing and keeping a roof over their heads. And in 90 days, when Crawford Technologies changed hands and his entire division disappeared, he wouldn't even have that choice. What about clinical trials? Harper's voice, practical, even now, drew Dr. Walsh's attention. Research programs. Seattle Children's Hospital has an excellent asthma research program that might cover costs, but it would require relocating there for at least 6 months. Dr. Walsh's gaze shifted between Marcus and Elena, who had remained silent near the door. I can make referrals if that's something you'd consider. Seattle, 6 hours north away from Harper, and the life Marcus had painstakingly rebuilt after Nora's death, away from Declan's school, and the few constants his son had left. But if it meant Declan could breathe without his lips turning blue, if it meant access to treatment he couldn't otherwise afford, then what choice did he really have? Elena stepped forward, her CEO mask firmly in place. Whatever Declan needs, whatever the cost, make it happen. The words came out crisp and final, brooking no argument. I'll handle the administrative details. Walsh nodded clearly, familiar with Elena's particular brand of getting things done, and excused herself to check on other patients. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Marcus alone with his son, his sister, and his boss in the muted beeping of medical equipment. Harper studied Elena with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd spent 15 years reading teenagers, then touched Marcus's shoulder. I'm going to grab coffee. Text me if anything changes. The door closed behind her, and Elena moved closer to the bed, her eyes on Declan's sleeping face. In the harsh fluorescent light, Marcus could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders that had nothing to do with their current crisis. You can't just swoop in and pay for my son's medical care. The words came out harder than intended, sharpened by fear and pride, and the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying too much alone for too long. I don't need charity from someone who's about to fire me. Elena flinched, actually flinched, and when she looked at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. It's not charity, she stopped searching for words. Marcus, there's so much you don't know. So much I need to tell you. About Nora. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, conscious of his sleeping son. What could you possibly know about my wife that I don't? Elena's hand went to her designer handbag, expensive leather that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget, and withdrew an envelope yellowed with age. The paper felt fragile when she pressed it into his hands, creased from multiple readings, and Marcus's heart stopped when he recognized the handwriting on the front. Nora's flowing script, the same that had filled journals and birthday cards and sticky notes on his lunch before she got too weak to hold a pen. The envelope was addressed to Robert Crawford, Elena's father, marked with a date 6 months before Nora died. My father kept it in his personal files. I found it 8 months ago after he passed. Elena's voice had gone soft, almost gentle. I didn't know about what he'd promised your wife. Not until I went through his office, trying to understand why the company was falling apart. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, and Nora's words swam before his eyes, made blurry by emotion he'd thought he'd buried 4 years ago. The letter started with professional courtesies, references to research they'd collaborated on years before Marcus had even met her, mentions of conferences and academic discussions that Nora had never shared with him. Then the tone shifted, became more urgent, more personal. Robert, I need to ask something I have no right to ask. If the treatment doesn't work, if I don't make it through this, please look out for Marcus and Declan. Don't tell Marcus it's because of me. He's too proud, would never accept help that smelled like pity. Just make sure opportunities come his way. Make sure he and our son have a chance at the life we plan together. The rest blurred. Marcus folded the letter carefully, refolding it along its original creases with mechanical precision, and placed it back in Elena's hands. His mind raced, connecting dots he'd never thought to look for. Robert Crawford had hired him 3 months after Nora's funeral and had made sure his resume landed on the right desks despite hundreds of more qualified applicants. The flexible schedule that let him handle Declan's school drop-offs and medical appointments. The promotion last year that came with a salary bump precisely timed to cover Declan's increased medical costs. None of it had been earned. All of it had been orchestrated by a dead woman's request to a man he'd never even met. So that's what I am. The bitterness surprised him with its intensity. A charity case. 4 years of thinking I'd rebuilt something on my own merit, that I'd provided for my son through hard work and skill, and it was all just someone else's guilt and pity. Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could see the genuine pain in her expression. No, you're brilliant at what you do. The code you wrote for the medical diagnostic interface is being used as a teaching ompediatina to Stanford. Your team's productivity increased 30% when you took over as lead. You would have succeeded anywhere, Marcus. Her hand hovered near his arm, not quite touching. Nora just opened a door. You walked through it and built something real on the other side. A door I'm about to be shoved back out of. Marcus turned back to his son, unable to bear the compassion in Elena's eyes. In 90 days, I lose the job your father gave me out of obligation. Declan loses health insurance right when he needs it most. And I'm supposed to be grateful that you're here throwing money at the problem like, that makes it better. That's not, Elena's voice broke, and when she continued, the words came out raw and unguarded. Marcus, I've watched you for nearly 2 years. Watched you volunteer for overnight shifts so single parents on your team could make it to their kids' school plays. Watched you eat lunch with every new hire so they didn't feel alone their first week. Watched you lead with patience and kindness in an industry that rewards neither. She took a shaky breath. Last night at the bar wasn't about the company or guilt or obligation. It was 2 years of wanting to know you as something more than an employee and running out of time to find the courage. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Declan shifted slightly in his sleep, a small sound escaping his lips that made Marcus's chest tighten. His son looked peaceful now, not struggling, and that was all that mattered. The job could be dealt with. The feelings Elena was confessing could be examined later when his world wasn't actively crumbling. But the fundamental question remained hanging in the antiseptic air between them. Why are you really here, Elena? She met his eyes, and whatever mask she'd been wearing, CEO, benefactor, concerned employer, crumbled completely. Because I'm in love with you, and I'm terrified, and tomorrow I have to sign away my father's legacy knowing I failed to save it, and the one honest thing I can do is make sure you and Declan are okay. The confession came out in a rush, words tumbling over each other. I know it's too much. I know the timing is terrible, but I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel. Marcus opened his mouth closed. It had no idea what to say to that. Elena Crawford, Ice Queen CEO who'd run her inherited company with ruthless efficiency for 2 years, was standing in a hospital room at midnight, confessing feelings he'd never let himself acknowledge might be mutual. Because he had noticed her, had caught himself watching the way she commanded boardrooms, the rare genuine smile when someone on his team solved a particularly tricky problem, the exhaustion she tried to hide during their last round of investor meetings. But she'd been his boss, and he had been surviving, and there had been no space for anything that complicated. I need to be with Declan. It was the only truth he could access right then, the only thing that made sense in the chaos. We can talk about the rest later. Elena nodded, composing herself with visible effort. Of course, I'll go, but Marcus, please take this. She pressed a business card into his hands, something different from the usual corporate contact info. Her personal cell was written on the back in the same confident script as her emails. Call me tomorrow, after you've had time to process. There's more to tell you about the job situation, about what I'm planning. You deserve to know all of it. She left before he could respond, her footsteps echoing down the corridor with a loneliness that matched his own. Marcus sank into the chair beside Declan's bed, his son's hand still clasped in his, and let the weight of the past 3 hours crash over him. His wife had arranged his employment from beyond the grave. His boss was in love with him. His son needed medication he couldn't afford. And in 90 days, the precarious stability he'd fought for would vanish, leaving him to start over again with even less to work with than before. Declan's stirred eyes fluttering open with the confusion of waking in an unfamiliar place. His gaze found Marcus and cleared a small smile breaking through despite the oxygen cannula and IV line. Dad, did you see I got the cool room with the space pictures? The ceiling was indeed decorated with glow-in-the-dark constellations, and Marcus found himself smiling despite everything. Pretty awesome, buddy. How are you feeling? Better. The nice lady said I could have ice cream when I wake up tomorrow. Declan's eyes were already drooping again, the medications pulling him back towards sleep. Is she your girlfriend? She looks like a princess. Marcus's throat tightened. What nice lady, Deck. But Declan had already drifted off again, his breathing even and unlabored with the oxygen's assistance. A nurse appeared in the doorway making notes on a tablet with practiced efficiency. Ms. Crawford arranged for all of your son's expenses tonight to be covered through the hospital's compassionate care program. Quite insistent about it. She smiled slightly. Must be nice having friends in high places. Friends. The word felt inadequate for whatever was developing between him and Elena, for the complicated tangle of obligation and attraction and resentment and gratitude that left him feeling off balance. Marcus thanked the nurse and settled back into his chair, pulling out his phone. A text from Elena sent just moments ago glowed on his screen. The car service will wait as long as you need. I've instructed the hospital to call me if you or Declan need anything. I'm sorry for everything, Marcus. Not just the company, everything. Harper returned with coffee that had gone lukewarm during her strategic absence, reading his expression with the skill of someone who'd known him his entire life. She paid for all of this. He gestured vaguely at the room, the equipment, the care that would have bankrupted him. Just arranged it with a few phone calls. And you're angry about it. I don't know what I am. Marcus took the coffee gratefully, the bitter liquid grounding him. She says she's in love with me, says she's been watching me for 2 years, then tells me the job I thought I earned was actually my dead wife pulling strings with her father before I even met them. Harper was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that preceded uncomfortable truths. Nora knew she was dying 6 months before the end. You were so focused on treatments and hope that you didn't see it, but I did. She was planning Marcus, making sure you and Declan would be okay after she was gone. His sister's hand found his arm. That wasn't pity, that was love, the kind that thinks beyond its own pain. But I should have been able to do it myself. The words came out broken, all the pride and hurt of the past 4 years condensing into a single admission. I should have been strong enough to provide for my son without my dying wife arranging it like I was a child who needed supervision. You are strong enough. You have been strong enough. Harper's voice carried the firmness of someone used to cutting through teenage melodrama to reach truth. But accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And maybe it's time you let yourself be human again. She left him with that claiming exhaustion in an early Saturday class that probably didn't exist but gave him space to think. Marcus sat in the dim room listening to Declan's steady breathing and the distant sounds of a hospital at night and pulled out the business card Elena had pressed into his hand. Her personal number, something she guarded as carefully as corporate secrets offered without hesitation. He thought about her confession delivered with the kind of raw honesty that had probably cost her more than he'd ever know. Thought about Nora's letter about plans made in desperation and love. Thought about the future stretching ahead, uncertain and terrifying, and somehow still containing possibilities he hadn't let himself imagine. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Elena, just 3 words that somehow carried more weight than everything else combined. Please don't disappear. Marcus stared at those words until they blurred, until the letter stopped making sense and reformed into something like a promise. He wouldn't disappear. Couldn't even if he wanted to. Elena had seen to that, and so had Nora before her. And maybe Harper was right. Maybe accepting help wasn't the same as admitting defeat. Maybe letting someone else carry part of the weight wasn't abandoning his responsibilities, but sharing them. Maybe, just maybe, there was a version of the future where he wasn't alone in all of this. He typed a response before he could second guess it. We need to talk. Really talk about all of it. Tomorrow. Her reply came instantly, like she'd been waiting by her phone. Yes, please. Coffee shop on Morrison noon, I'll be there. Marcus pocketed his phone and looked at his son, so small and vulnerable, in the oversized hospital bed, and felt the weight of every decision pressing down on his shoulders. In 90 days, everything would change again. But tonight Declan was breathing, and Elena had offered something he couldn't quite name, and somewhere in the ruins of his carefully reconstructed life, there might be space to build something new. Something that wasn't just survival, but actually living. The thought terrified him almost as much as it offered hope. Morning arrived with the harsh reality of hospital shift changes and breakfast trays that Declan pushed around his plate without much interest. Dr. Walsh made her rounds early, her assessment cautiously optimistic, but hedged with the kind of warnings Marcus had learned to dread. Discharge papers by noon if everything stayed stable, follow-up appointments, medication adjustments. The unspoken understanding that this was a pause, not a solution, and the next attack could come at any time. Harper arrived with fresh clothes and Declan's favorite book about constellations taking over entertainment duties, while Marcus handled the bureaucratic maze of hospital paperwork. Every form seemed designed to remind him of his precarious financial situation. Insurance information that would be obsolete in 3 months, emergency contacts that began and ended with his sister. He signed where indicated accepted pamphlets about asthma management he'd already memorized and tried not to think about the text waiting on his phone. Papers signed an hour ago. It's done. Can we talk? There's something about Nora I need to tell you. The message had arrived at 8 in the morning, meaning Elena had been at the office on a Saturday finalizing the sale of her father's company while he'd been watching Declan eat ice cream and complain about the boring TV channels. The juxtaposition felt wrong, like two different realities trying to occupy the same space. He needed to see her to understand what she knew about Nora, that he didn't, to figure out if the feelings she'd confessed last night had been exhaustion talking or something more permanent. Declan was finally released just after 11, full of stories about the nice nurse who'd brought extra pudding and the doctor who'd let him listen to his own heartbeat. Harper drove them home in comfortable silence, understanding without being told that Marcus needed space to process. She stayed long enough to make sure they had groceries, that Declan was settled with his nebulizer treatment scheduled, then headed back to her apartment with a long look that said they'd talk later when small ears weren't listening. The house felt empty despite Declan's presence, all the spaces that used to hold Nora's energy, now just rooms filled with furniture and memories. Marcus got his son set up with the movie and his favorite blanket, checked medication schedules twice, and texted Harper to confirm she'd be available for backup. Then he pulled out his phone, Elena's message still glowing on the screen, and typed before he could change his mind. Deck's home and stable. Harper's on standby. I can meet you at noon. The coffee shop Elena had chosen sat on a quiet stretch of Morrison Street, the kind of place that catered to freelancers and students rather than business meetings. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early out of habit, ordered black coffee he didn't particularly want, and claimed a corner table where he could see the door. His fingers drummed against the ceramic mug, nervous energy that had nowhere else to go. The baristas worked their espresso machines with practiced rhythm, steam hissing and milk frothing, the familiar sounds doing nothing to settle the anxiety coiling in his chest. Elena walked through the door at exactly noon, still wearing the same clothes from last night, looking like she'd been up as long as he had. Her eyes found his immediately, and the relief that crossed her face when he didn't look away told him more than words could about how much she'd feared he wouldn't show. She got coffee, something complicated with oat milk that the barista knew without asking, and slid into the seat across from him with visible exhaustion. Thank you for coming. Her voice was softer than her boardroom tone, no corporate armor left. I wasn't sure you would. You said you knew something about Nora, about my wife. Marcus kept his own voice level, not quite ready to address anything else. How could you possibly know anything about her that I don't? Elena's hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth despite the June sunshine streaming through the windows. Your wife and my father knew each other. More than knew each other, actually. They were research partners. She pulled out her phone, swiped through files until she found what she wanted. They published a paper together 7 years ago on neural network applications in early cancer detection. Nora was finishing her PhD. My father was her mentor. The words didn't compute at first. Nora had done her doctoral work in computational neuroscience at OHSU, had spent years researching how artificial intelligence could improve medical diagnostics, but she'd never mentioned Robert Crawford. Never brought home stories about a mentor who'd later give her husband a job. The omission felt like betrayal, even knowing she'd had reasons Marcus couldn't begin to guess. Show me. Elena turned her phone around, and there it was, an academic paper with both names prominently featured. Nora Sullivan's photo from 6 years ago, when her hair had still been long and her smile hadn't yet been touched by the knowledge of what was growing in her brain. Robert Crawford beside her, a distinguished man in his late 50s who looked nothing like his daughter except around the eyes. Marcus scanned the abstract, recognized Nora's particular way of framing problems and solutions, and felt something crack open in his chest. They stayed in touch after she finished her degree. My father tried to recruit her to Crawford Technologies, offered her a research position that would have been perfect. Elena's finger traced the edge of her cup, not quite meeting his eyes. She turned him down, said her husband had a good job in Portland, her son was starting school, he didn't want to uproot the family for her career. That sounded like Nora. She'd always put family first, even when it meant sacrificing opportunities that might have taken her places. Marcus's steady but unremarkable software engineering couldn't match. He'd never asked her to make those choices, had offered multiple times to follow wherever her work led, but she'd insisted Portland was home and they were building something that mattered more than prestige. And then she got sick. Elena nodded, her expression heavy with something that looked like grief despite never having met the woman they were discussing. She emailed my father 6 months before she died. I found the correspondence in his files. She knew the treatment wasn't working, knew she didn't have much time, and she asked him to watch out for you and Declan. Elena finally met his eyes, and her own were wet. Not overtly, not in a way that would hurt your pride, just to make sure opportunities came your way when you needed them most. The coffee shop noise faded to background static. Marcus could see it, now could trace the invisible thread connecting his wife's final months to the job offer that had arrived exactly when he'd needed it, to the salary that had somehow always been enough, to the flexibility that had let him be the father Declan needed. Nora had been planning for their future while he'd been desperately trying to keep her in the present, and she'd never told him because she'd known he'd refuse, known that Marcus Sullivan's pride would rather struggle than accept anything that felt like charity. So when Crawford Technologies hired me, it wasn't because I was qualified. It was because my wife called in a deathbed favor. No. Elena's hand shot across the table, stopping just short of touching his. You were qualified, overqualified actually. My father made sure your resume got to the right people, but the work you've done since then, the respect you've earned, that's all you, Marcus. Nora opened a door. You built a career on the other side. The distinction felt meaningless. 4 years of thinking he'd provided for his son through skill and hard work, and it had all been orchestrated by people who'd pitied him. The widow with the sick kid who needed a break. Even if Elena was right about his abilities, even if he would have eventually found his way without intervention, the truth was that every paycheck had been tainted by someone else's guilt and obligation. I need to know something. Marcus forced himself to look at her directly, to ask the question that mattered most. Did you know when you took over after your father died? Did you know about the arrangement? Elena's hesitation answered before her words did. Not immediately. I found the letter to your wife 8 months ago, along with emails between them. By then, you'd been working for us for over 3 years. I'd been CEO for nearly a year and a half. She took a shaky breath. I'd already been watching you, Marcus. Already noticed how you led your team, how you handled pressure, how you never made excuses when things went wrong. Finding out about my father's promise didn't change my opinion of your work. It just explained why I felt so responsible for making sure you were okay. And falling in love with me. When did that happen? The question came out harder than intended, edged with all the confusion and anger and unwanted attraction that had been building since last night. Elena flinched but didn't look away, and when she answered, her voice carried the weight of truth. Gradually, then suddenly, I watched you volunteer for overnight shifts so other people could have work-life balance. Watched you mentor junior developers with more patience than anyone I had ever seen. Watched you bring Declan to the office holiday party and spend the entire time making sure he felt included instead of networking like everyone else. Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. You were everything I admired and nothing I could have, and somewhere along the way, admiration became something much more complicated. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable and impossible to ignore. Marcus studied her face, looking for deception or manipulation or corporate calculation, but all he saw was exhaustion and genuine emotion. Elena Crawford, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking stride, looked absolutely terrified, sitting across from him in a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon. "You're selling your father's company, eliminating my department, and you're telling me you love me." Marcus shook his head, the pieces not fitting together in any configuration that made sense. "What exactly am I supposed to do with that, Elena?" "I don't know." She laughed, but it came out broken. "I don't have a plan for this. I've spent 2 years trying to save Crawford Technologies and I failed. I've spent nearly as long trying not to feel what I feel for you, and I failed at that too. So here I am with nothing left to lose, telling you the truth because it's the only thing I haven't tried yet." The honesty of it struck something deep. Marcus had spent 4 years playing it safe, following rules, maintaining boundaries, building a life of careful stability that protected him and Declan from any more loss. Elena was offering chaos and uncertainty and the terrifying possibility of something real, and every instinct screamed to walk away before it could hurt him. But Declan's words from the hospital drifted back. "She looks like a princess," and Marcus realized his son had seen something he'd been too scared to acknowledge. Had seen Elena visiting his room humming lullabies. She couldn't have known Nora used to sing, treating a 9-year-old with the same care and respect she gave to board members. "There's a tra." Elena's words came out rushed, like she was afraid to stop talking. "I'm starting a new company, Crawford Solutions, smaller, focused on AI-assisted medical diagnostics. I want you as VP of Engineering. Salary 40% higher than your current position. Based in Seattle." She pulled out a folder he hadn't noticed her carrying, slowed it across the table. "This isn't charity. It's not guilt. It's me recognizing talent and wanting to build something meaningful with people I trust." Marcus opened the folder, scanning business plans and financial projections, and a contract with his name already printed in the signature line. The salary figure made his eyes widen despite himself. It was more than enough to cover Declan's medical care, more than enough to provide the stability he'd been chasing for 4 years. It was also in Seattle, 6 hours away from Harper, and everything familiar in a city where Dr. Walsh had said they could access the research program that might save his son's life. Why me? Hundreds of qualified engineers out there, and you want the guy whose wife pulled strings to get him hired in the first place. Elena leaned forward, intensity replacing vulnerability. "Because you're not just qualified, Marcus. You're exceptional. Because I trust you to care about what we're building, not just the paycheck. Because I need someone who understands that technology serves people, not the other way around." She paused, then added quietly, "And because I want you in my life, professionally and personally, if you'll let me." The folder sat between them, containing possibilities Marcus wasn't sure he had the courage to reach for. Seattle meant starting over again, leaving behind the life he'd rebuilt with such careful effort. It also meant better medical care for Declan, financial security, and the chance to work on research that could actually matter. It meant spending more time with Elena, letting himself explore whatever was developing between them without the complications of corporate hierarchy. It meant risk and uncertainty, and all the things he'd sworn to avoid after Nora died. "I need time." The words felt inadequate, but they were true. "Declan's home recovering. I have to talk to my son about moving, about changing schools and leaving Harper. I need to think about whether this is really what I want or just what I need right now." Elena nodded, gathering her folder with visible effort at composure. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of us, Marcus. Regardless of feelings or complications or anything else. You earned this." She stood, hesitated, then added, "Your wife loved you enough to plan for your future, even when she knew she wouldn't be part of it. Maybe it's time you let yourself have that future." She left before he could formulate a response, and Marcus sat alone in the coffee shop with cold coffee and impossible decisions weighing on his shoulders. His phone showed texts from Harper checking on Declan, from colleagues he'd worked with for years, who'd probably be getting their own termination notices on Monday, from Elena, sent just moments ago, with a simple message that somehow carried the weight of everything unsaid. "Thank you for listening. Whatever you decide, thank you." Marcus left the coffee shop and drove home through familiar streets that suddenly felt like they were already part of his past. Declan was awake when he arrived, breathing easy with his nebulizer treatments completed, asking 1,000 questions about space and stars, and whether they'd ever get to see the Northern Lights. Harper had stayed despite promising to leave reading to his son from the astronomy book that had become his current obsession. She looked up when Marcus entered, took one look at his face, and tactfully announced she needed to run errands that definitely couldn't wait. Dad, did you know that Andromeda Galaxy is going to crash into the Milky Way in 4 billion years? Declan's eyes were bright with excitement, no trace of last night's crisis visible. But it's okay because space is so big that nothing will actually hit each other. The galaxies will just kind of merge together into something new. Marcus settled onto the couch beside his son, pulling the 9-year-old close in a one-armed hug that Declan tolerated with the patience of a kid who knew his father needed it more than he did. Sounds like a pretty good deal, getting to become something new instead of just crashing and burning. Declan looked up at him with Nora's dark eyes, wisdom beyond his years, lurking behind childish enthusiasm. Is that what you and Mrs. Elena are going to do, merge together like galaxies? The question caught Marcus completely off guard, and he found himself laughing despite everything. Where did that come from, buddy? She came to see me in the hospital. Declan snuggled closer, content in a way he hadn't been since before Nora died. She said Mom used to like stars too, that Mom knew her dad. She was nice, Dad. Not scared of me because I'm sick nice. Real nice, like how you are with me. Something in Marcus's chest cracked open, years of careful control fracturing under the weight of his son's simple observation. Elena had visited Declan while he'd been handling paperwork, had connected with his son in a way that went beyond obligation or guilt, and Declan had seen through to the truth of it. His 9-year-old, who'd lost his mother too young and spent too much time in hospitals, who'd learned to read adults for signs of pity or discomfort, had decided Elena Crawford was worth trusting. Would you be okay if we spent more time with Ms. Elena? Maybe got to know her better? Declan's response was immediate and unequivocal. Yeah, she's pretty and smart and she knows about space. Plus she makes you smile like Mom used to make you smile, and you don't do that a lot anymore. The observation hit harder than any business proposition or romantic confession. Marcus had been so focused on survival, on maintaining stability and meeting medical needs and keeping his son safe, that he'd forgotten about actually being happy. Had forgotten that Declan noticed when his father was just going through the motions, that kids saw through careful facades to the exhaustion underneath. Mom would want you to have friends, Dad, not just Harper, real friends who make you not sad. Nora's voice echoed in Marcus's memory, that last coherent conversation before the cancer had stolen too much of who she was. Promise me you'll find love again. Tyler needs to see his father happy. He'd never been able to promise that, had spent 4 years breaking the unspoken vow every day by refusing to even try. But maybe Declan was right. Maybe real friends, maybe more than friends, was exactly what they both needed. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Just a photo this time. Declan asleep in his hospital bed, the constellation ceiling glowing above him, looking peaceful despite all the medical equipment. She'd taken it before Marcus arrived, captured a moment of vulnerability and care that spoke louder than any confession. He showed it to Declan, watched his son's face light up with recognition and pleasure. Can we text her back? Tell her thank you for the space ceiling. Marcus helped Declan compose a message simple and sweet, in the way only children could manage, and hit send before he could second-guess the gesture. Elena's response came almost immediately, another photo of the night sky over Portland stars, brilliant against the darkness, with a caption that made Marcus's throat tight. For Declan. The universe is full of second chances. Sometimes we just have to be brave enough to take them. He looked at his son, safe and warm and breathing easily, for the first time in days, and thought about galaxies merging into something new, instead of destroying each other on impact. Thought about Nora planning for this moment years ago, trusting strangers to care for the family she'd have to leave behind. Thought about Elena, who'd watched him for 2 years and fallen in love, despite every rational reason not to, who was offering him a future he'd been too scared to imagine. Monday morning arrived with the artificial brightness of a coffee shop Marcus had never visited before, 3 blocks from his house, in a neighborhood gentrifying faster than he could track. Elena had texted the address with apologetic precision, somewhere neutral, if that's okay, and he'd agreed without thinking it through. Declan sat beside him now in the corner booth school conference days, giving them an unexpected Monday off his son's astronomy book spread across the table like a treaty negotiation between warring factions. Elena walked through the door at exactly 9, and Marcus barely recognized her. Gone was every trace of the CEO who'd commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals. She wore black yoga pants and an oversized gray hoodie, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look closer to 25 than 36. No makeup softened the exhaustion etched around her eyes, but something else had replaced the corporate armor vulnerability so raw it hurt to witness. Declan looked up from his book recognition, flashing across his face before Marcus could prepare him. "You're the star lady." Not a question, just a statement of fact delivered with the absolute certainty of 9-year-olds who decided someone was worth trusting. From the hospital, Elena's smile transformed her entire face, genuine warmth, breaking through whatever walls she'd been maintaining. "I am. And you must be feeling better if you're reading about constellations." She slid into the booth across from them, her coffee order apparently already placed by some prearrangement with the barista. "Did you know that Andromeda Galaxy is going to collide with our Milky Way in about 4 billion years? But don't worry, space is so vast that stars probably won't even touch each other. They'll just merge into something completely new." Declan's eyes went wide with a particular excitement reserved for adults who actually knew things about space, instead of just pretending interest. "That's what Dad said, about galaxies merging instead of crashing." He looked between them with the unnerving perception of children who noticed everything. "Are you two going to merge like galaxies?" Marcus choked on his coffee. Elena's laugh coming out surprised and delighted, and the tension that had been coiling in his chest since Saturday loosened fractionally. His son had just asked his former boss if they were dating using astronomical metaphors, and somehow it was the most natural thing in the world. "We're still figuring that out, Dec." Marcus managed to keep his voice steady, acutely aware of Elena's eyes on him. "Why don't you show Elena your project for science night?" The distraction worked perfectly. Declan launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his Mars habitat design, complete with sketches that showed surprising attention to detail for a fourth grader. Elena listened with genuine interest, asking questions that demonstrated actual knowledge rather than polite attention. She knew about atmospheric pressure and radiation shielding and the challenges of growing food in Martian soil, engaging with Declan's ideas like they mattered beyond just keeping a kid entertained. Marcus watched them together and felt something shift irrevocably in his chest. Elena Crawford, who'd spent 2 years running a failing technology company and watching her father's legacy crumble, was discussing terraforming concepts with a 9-year-old like it was the most important conversation of her day. She caught his eye over Declan's bent head, and the question there was clear. "Is this okay? Am I doing this right?" He nodded just barely, and her shoulders relaxed infinitesimally. "You know what, Dec? I think I have some 3D printing equipment at my place. We could make a model of your Mars base if you want. Your dad and I could help you design it." Declan's excitement was immediate and overwhelming, already sketching modifications in the margins of his notebook. Marcus seized the moment while his son was distracted. "Can we talk just for a few minutes?" Elena understood immediately, her attention shifting fully to him while keeping Declan in peripheral awareness. "Tell me about you, not CEO Elena, the real person underneath all of that." Her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to anchor her. "I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." The admission came quietly, stripped of any pretense. "I became CEO at 34 when my father died. Heart attack in his office, completely unexpected. One day I was VP of operations learning the business, and the next I was responsible for 300 employees and a company hemorrhaging money from an expansion that should never have happened." Marcus waited, letting the silence stretch until she continued. "I wanted to walk away immediately, sell everything and start over somewhere without the weight of expectations crushing me. But the board convinced me I owed it to my father's memory to try saving what he'd built." Her laugh was bitter. "I spent 2 years trying to fix something that was already broken, watching good people lose their jobs because I wasn't smart enough or strong enough to turn it around. And the whole time I was watching you." The shift in topic caught him off guard. "Watching me what? Build a life, a real one with actual priorities and meaning beyond quarterly earnings reports." Elena's eyes met his, unflinching. "You chose Declan every single day. volunteered for night shifts so other single parents could have work-life balance, ate lunch with junior developers to make sure they felt welcome, led your team with patience I'd never seen in tech. And I was so envious I could barely stand being in the same room with you. Marcus processed that the image of himself through her eyes not quite matching his own experience of barely holding things together. You envied me. You had money, power, success. I was drowning in my father's dream. Elena's voice cracked slightly. You were living yours. Every morning you woke up and chose what mattered most, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. I never had that choice, or maybe I did, and was too afraid to make it. The honesty stripped away any remaining defenses Marcus had been maintaining. This wasn't the calculated confession of someone trying to manipulate him. This was a woman who'd reached the end of her carefully constructed facade and found nothing underneath except exhaustion and loneliness. That night at the bar, Marcus started, but Elena cut him off. Wasn't me trying to seduce you for fun. It was desperation. I wanted one honest thing before everything fell apart one moment, where I wasn't pretending to be someone I'm not. She took a shaky breath. I know that's selfish. I know the timing is terrible, but I'm done lying to myself about what I want. Declan's voice interrupted before Marcus could formulate a response. Dad, Elena should come to science night on Thursday. Can she come, please? The request was so earnest, so full of hope, that refusing felt impossible. Marcus looked at Elena, saw the carefully neutral expression that hid how much the invitation meant, and made a decision that terrified him. If Elena wants to come, she's welcome. The smile that broke across her face was worth every moment of uncertainty. Declan immediately began planning what she should wear and which parts of his presentation she'd help, with the assumption of her presence already integrated into his worldview. Marcus sat back and let the chaos wash over him. Harper's words from Saturday echoing in his mind. Maybe accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. By the time they left the coffee shop an hour later, Elena had promised to help with the Mars base model and attend science night. Declan had extracted a commitment to teach him about neural networks, and Marcus had agreed to dinner later in the week. Just the two of them, no 9-year-olds as buffers, talking about Seattle and job offers and whatever was developing between them. The normalcy of it felt surreal, like he'd stepped sideways into someone else's life, where complicated feelings and new beginnings were allowed. That evening after Declan was asleep, Marcus opened his laptop and did what he'd been avoiding since Elena's revelation. He searched for Nora's academic work following digital breadcrumbs through university archives and research databases. The paper appeared quickly published 7 years ago in a prestigious journal, Neural Network Applications in Early Cancer Detection. Nora Sullivan and Robert Crawford, her name second, but her contribution clearly substantial based on the methodology section. There were photos from the conference where they'd presented Nora vibrant and alive in a way Marcus had almost forgotten, standing beside a distinguished man who had Elena's eyes and determined jaw. He clicked through to more results, finding email addresses and collaboration histories that painted a picture of a mentorship Nora had never mentioned. Why wouldn't she have told him they'd shared everything, or so he'd thought? But the dates made it clear this had been during her doctoral work, before they'd met, during the years she'd been building the foundation of a career she'd ultimately sacrificed for him. Marcus accessed Nora's old email account, the password still unchanged from when she'd been alive. He'd kept it active, unable to let go of that final connection, and now he scrolled through years of correspondence looking for Robert Crawford's name. The search returned dozens of results, messages spanning from professional collaboration to something warmer, more personal. Nora had respected Crawford, admired his work, and apparently trusted him enough to share concerns about career choices and family obligations. Robert Marcus got the promotion at his current job, which means moving to Portland makes sense for everyone. I know you offered me the research position, and part of me desperately wants to take it, but Declan starts kindergarten this fall, and Marcus has stability here. Sometimes love means choosing someone else's dreams alongside your own. Crawford's response had been understanding, almost paternal. You'll always have a place here if circumstances change. Family comes first, Nora. Never forget that. Then 3 years later, the diagnosis. Nora's messages shifted, became more urgent beneath the clinical descriptions of treatment plans and prognosis discussions. She'd told Crawford about the cancer before telling some of her closest friends, seeking advice from someone who understood research medicine and could help her navigate experimental therapies. And through it all, Robert had been there offering connections to specialists and encouragement when hope seemed distant. The message that broke Marcus came 6 months before Nora died, sent from her hospital room during a particularly bad week of chemotherapy side effects. I need to ask something I have no right to ask. The treatment isn't working, Robert. I can feel it, even though the doctors keep talking about more options and clinical trials. I'm running out of time and I'm terrified of what happens to Marcus and Declan when I'm gone. Marcus is strong, but he's also proud, and he won't accept help if he knows it's charity. Please, if there's any way you could make sure he has opportunities, not handouts, just chances to show what he's capable of, I would be forever grateful. Don't tell him about this. He'd refuse on principle, and they need stability more than he needs his pride intact. Robert's reply had come within hours, unequivocal in its promise. Consider it done. Marcus and Declan will be taken care of, and your husband will never know it's because of you unless you tell him yourself. Focus on getting better, Nora. The world needs your brilliance. But there was one more message sent a week before Nora lost the ability to communicate clearly. Robert's final email to her, pouring out thoughts he must have known she might not be conscious enough to fully process. Elena doesn't know about our arrangement, and perhaps that's for the best. She's so brilliant but struggles with boundaries between personal and professional life, afraid to need anyone after losing her mother young. Marcus sounds like exactly the kind of man who could teach her that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed and healing has occurred, they'll find their way to each other. Not because of anything we arranged, but because some people are meant to connect across grief and circumstance. I hope they get that chance, Nora. I hope my daughter finds someone who sees her the way Marcus clearly saw you. Marcus's vision blurred reading the words 3 times before they fully registered. Robert Crawford had been matchmaking from beyond the grave, or at least expressing hope that his lonely daughter might find connection with the widowed man he'd promised to help. It explains so much about Elena's confusion and guilt, about feeling obligated to watch over him, while genuine feelings developed alongside duty. He closed the laptop, unable to process anything more, and sat in the darkness of his living room, trying to reconcile everything he'd learned. Nora had orchestrated his employment out of love and fear. Robert had kept that promise while hoping for something more. Elena had inherited both the obligation and her father's wish, watching Marcus from a professional distance until the feelings became impossible to ignore. None of them had done anything wrong exactly, but the weight of expectations and unspoken hopes pressed down like physical force. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena sent late enough that she probably assumed he was asleep. I keep thinking about today, about how Declan looked at his Mars sketches like they mattered to the universe, about how you let me be part of that without making it weird. Thank you for seeing me as something more than my father's daughter, or your boss, or the person who destroyed your job security. Thank you for just seeing me. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response before doubt could stop him. I found the emails. Between Nora and your father. All of them, including the one where he said he hoped you and I might find each other someday. Her reply came almost instantly, suggesting she'd been waiting by her phone. I'm so sorry. I didn't know about that part until I found his personal files. It feels like we're puppets dancing to strings pulled by people who aren't even here anymore. Or maybe they just cleared obstacles so we could choose freely without them. The distinction mattered more than Marcus had words to express. If Robert and Nora had manipulated them into this situation, then every feeling was suspect, tainted by someone else's agenda. But if they'd simply created possibility and stepped back, then whatever developed belonged to Marcus and Elena alone. I want to believe that. So do I. See you Thursday. Wouldn't miss it. Thursday evening arrived faster than Marcus anticipated. The elementary school multi-purpose room transformed into a showcase of fourth-grade scientific enthusiasm. Declan had been vibrating with nervous energy all day, triple-checking his presentation notes and adjusting the 3D printed Mars base model Elena had helped him create at her apartment 2 nights ago. The project had given them hours together, Elena's technical knowledge combining with Declan's imagination to produce something genuinely impressive. Marcus had watched them work the easy rapport between them, feeling simultaneously natural and terrifying. Elena arrived exactly on time, dressed casually in jeans and a green sweater that made her eyes even more striking. She'd brought a tablet loaded with actual NASA images to supplement Declan's presentation, and his son's excited greeting carried through the crowded room. Other parents turned to look, taking in the unfamiliar woman, who'd clearly put considerable effort into a 9-year-old's school project. Marcus felt their curiosity like a physical weight, the small-town nature of Portland's suburbs, ensuring that speculation would spread quickly. Mrs. Catherine Foster, Declan's teacher, materialized beside them with the knowing smile of someone who'd seen this particular situation play out countless times. "Mr. Sullivan, I didn't realize you were seeing someone. How wonderful for Declan." Her eyes assessed Elena with the thoroughness of an educator who took student welfare seriously. "He's been so excited about his project all week." Marcus felt Elena tense beside him, preparing to retreat into professional distance, and made a split-second decision. "This is Elena Crawford. She's been helping Declan with the technical aspects of his Mars habitat design. And yes, we're figuring out what we are to each other." The honesty disarmed Mrs. Foster's curiosity, her smile warming genuinely. "Well, Declan is fortunate to have adults in his life who take his interests seriously. His presentation is scheduled for 7:15 if you'd like to grab seats near the front." They settled into folding chairs that squeaked with every movement, Declan proudly displaying his project to classmates, who gathered around the Mars model with appropriate enthusiasm. Elena fielded questions from other children with the same genuine engagement she'd shown Declan, explaining concepts in terms that made sense without being condescending. Marcus watched her transform from the exhausted woman in the coffee shop to someone fully present, animated by the simple act of sharing knowledge with kids who actually wanted to learn. When Declan's turn came, he delivered his presentation with confidence that shocked Marcus. His son, who usually struggled with public speaking, walked through each element of Martian colonization like he'd been preparing for this his entire life. Elena had coached him well, teaching him to pause for effect and make eye contact with the audience, to use the visual aids effectively without letting them overwhelm his message. The parents applauded enthusiastically when he finished, and Marcus's chest swelled with pride, so intense it almost hurt. The drive home was full of Declan's chatter, replaying every moment and cataloging which parts got the biggest reactions. Elena sat in the back seat with him, encouraging his enthusiasm while gently pointing out areas to improve for next time. The domesticity of it struck Marcus like lightning. This was what family looked like. Not just surviving, but thriving, sharing victories, and building memories together. They pulled into the driveway and Elena moved to get out, assumably heading to her own car parked on the street. "Wait," Declan's voice stopped her. "Everyone thought you were my mom." The silence that followed felt enormous, heavy with implications Marcus wasn't ready to address. His son's face showed no distress, just simple observation delivered with that unnerving perception that seemed to be his defining characteristic lately. "Did that bother you, sweetheart?" Elena's voice was gentle, carefully neutral. "No, but would it bother Mom?" Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only watch as his 9-year-old asked questions that deserved answers he didn't know how to give. Elena looked at him, seeking permission or guidance, and he managed a slight nod. She turned back to Declan, choosing her words with visible care. "Your mom loved you more than anything in the universe, and she wanted your dad to be happy, wanted you both to have good people in your lives." Her hand found Declan, squeezing gently. "I'm not trying to replace her, Dec. No one could ever do that. But I would be honored to be someone who cares about you and your dad, if that's okay with both of you." Declan processed this with the seriousness of someone much older, then threw his arms around Elena in a hug that made her gasp with surprise. Marcus's throat closed completely, tears he couldn't control streaming down his face as he watched his son embrace this woman who'd somehow become essential in the space of a week. Elena held Declan carefully, her own eyes wet, and met Marcus's gaze over his son's shoulder with something that looked like hope and terror combined. The moment passed. Declan pulled back, suddenly shy about his display of affection, and announced he was tired and wanted to go to bed. Marcus got him through the bedtime routine on autopilot, his mind still processing what had just happened in the driveway. By the time he returned to the living room, Elena had let herself in and was standing at the window overlooking his small backyard, her silhouette outlined by streetlight. "I should go." She didn't turn around, voice small and uncertain. This is moving too fast, and I don't want to confuse Declan or make things harder for either of you. Marcus crossed the room before conscious decision caught up with intention, his hand finding her shoulder and turning her to face him. Stay. Just for coffee. Please. The words came out rough, weighted with everything he couldn't quite articulate. I found something else in the emails. Something I need to show you. They settled on the couch with fresh coffee, neither of them wanted, and Marcus pulled up Robert's final message to Nora on his laptop. Elena read it silently, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that might have been grief for opportunities her father never got to see fulfilled. He wanted us to find each other. Her voice was barely audible. Not because of obligation or guilt, but because he thought we might actually be good for each other. My wife and your father were playing matchmaker from the afterlife. Marcus shook his head, the absurdity and sweetness of it tangling together. They cleared the path and hoped we'd be smart enough to walk it. Elena's hand found his on the couch cushion between them, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture that felt simultaneously momentous and perfectly natural. I've been so angry at them. At my father for making promises that forced me to watch you at your wife, for orchestrating everything without giving you a choice. But maybe they just loved us enough to try making things easier, even knowing they wouldn't be here to see how it turned out. The truth of that settled into Marcus's bones, reframing everything he'd been fighting against for the past week. Nora hadn't pitied him. She'd protected him. Protected Declan with the last bit of agency she'd possessed. Robert hadn't manipulated. He'd created opportunities and stepped back to let Marcus prove himself. And Elena hadn't been coerced into feelings, she'd developed them naturally while honoring her father's final request. I'm terrified. The confession escaped before Marcus could stop it. Of feeling something real again, of letting you close enough to hurt us if it doesn't work. Declan already adores you, and if we try this and it falls apart. Elena shifted closer, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw with surprising tenderness. I'm terrified too. I've never been good at relationships, at letting people see past the competent exterior to the mess underneath. But Marcus, I've been half alive for 2 years, going through motions and pretending it was enough. Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone. You make me want to actually live again. That's terrifying and wonderful, and I have no idea how to handle it. They were close now, close enough that Marcus could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, close enough that breathing felt like a shared experience. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back, and when their lips finally met, it was nothing like the desperate kiss at the bar would have been. This was gentle, tentative, full of promise rather than urgency. Elena's fingers threaded into his hair, his hands finding her waist, and for a moment everything else ceased to exist, except the connection building between them. Then Declan's voice shattered the moment from upstairs, high-pitched with distress. Dad, bad dream? Marcus pulled back, reality crashing down with brutal efficiency. Elena's hand touched his arm, understanding written across her face as he stood and headed for the stairs. Go. He needs you. By the time Marcus got Declan settled again singing the lullaby, Nora used to hum until his son's breathing evened out into sleep. Elena had let herself out. A note on the coffee table explained in her precise handwriting, didn't want to intrude on family time. Thank you for tonight, for trusting me with both of you. Can we talk tomorrow? Just us. Marcus texted his response immediately. Yes, tomorrow. And Elena, that kiss was worth waiting 4 years for. Her reply came within seconds. Only 4 years, I think I've been waiting my whole life. Friday evening found them walking along the Willamette River Portland skyline reflected in dark water as the sun set in spectacular oranges and purples. Harper had taken Declan for the night with knowing smiles and pointed comments about how Marcus deserved to have something for himself instead of always putting everyone else first. The guilt of that sat uncomfortably in his chest, alongside anticipation and nervousness he hadn't felt since he'd been young enough to think first dates mattered less than they actually did. Elena had suggested the walk when anything more formal felt like too much pressure, and she'd been right. Moving gave them something to do with their hands and bodies, let them exist in the same space without the intensity of direct eye contact making every word carry impossible weight. Tell me about growing up. Marcus needed to hear her story to understand the woman beneath all the layers of grief and responsibility she'd accumulated. What was young Elena Crawford like before the world got complicated? She laughed surprised and a little sad. Lonely mostly. My mother died when I was 12, also cancer, which my father took as a personal failure. He threw himself into work building the company and trying to outrun grief by staying busy. Her gaze tracked a kayaker moving upstream with determined strokes. I learned early that achievement got his attention when nothing else did. Perfect grades, academic awards, internships at 15. By the time I realized I'd built an entire life around impressing someone who was never going to be satisfied, it was too late to become anyone else. Marcus processed that, seeing the lonely girl who'd become the controlled woman walking beside him. And relationships, you mentioned an ex-boyfriend. Several actually, though none that mattered much. Elena's shoulder brushed his as they navigated around a group of tourists taking photos. They all eventually figured out I was more married to the company than to them. The last one was 4 years ago, right after I became CEO. He gave me an ultimatum: choose him or Crawford Technologies. I chose the company, and he left calling me an ice queen who'd die alone in her corner office. The casual delivery didn't hide how much the words had hurt, how deeply she'd internalized that assessment of herself. He was wrong. You're not cold, Elena. You're just scared of letting anyone see how much you care, because caring means being vulnerable, and vulnerability means potential loss. Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her directly. But I see you, the woman who learned at Mars colonization facts to help a 9-year-old feel special, who arranged medical care without being asked because someone needed help, who kept her father's dying company alive for 2 years because honoring his memory mattered more than her own exhaustion. That's not ice, that's courage wearing a protective shell. Elena's eyes went bright with unshed tears, her careful control fracturing. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, and it's not even about romance. It's just seeing me accurately when everyone else only sees the job title. They resumed walking closer now, her hand finding his with natural ease. Marcus told her about his own childhood, the middle-class stability, and loving parents who'd given him the foundation to survive everything that came later. About his older brother deployed overseas more than home, about Harper choosing teaching because she wanted to make differences in lives rather than just earn paychecks. About meeting Nora in graduate school and knowing immediately she was too brilliant for someone as ordinary as him, but somehow she'd chosen him anyway. Then she got sick, and I learned that all the stability and planning in the world means nothing when cells start dividing wrong. I thought I knew loss, thought I understood grief, but watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. His voice broke the familiar ache of those memories never quite healing. It took 4 years to feel like I was living instead of just surviving. And then you walked into that bar and upended everything again. They'd reached a quiet section of the waterfront benches overlooking the river, empty in the cooling evening. Elena pulled him down to sit, her hands still firmly clasped in his. This time you're choosing the upending, though. You said yes to Seattle, yes to the job offer, yes to... She gestured between them, not quite ready to label what they were building. This isn't survival. This is you deciding to actually live again. Marcus turned that over, recognizing the truth of it. Nora had made plans from her hospital bed, but Marcus was the one implementing them now, actively stepping toward a future that included possibility instead of just obligation. I'm still terrified. The admission felt necessary, important to voice before they went any further. Of losing you like I lost her. Of Declan getting attached and being hurt if this doesn't work. Of moving to Seattle and starting over again when I've barely finished rebuilding from the last disaster. Elena shifted closer, her free hand coming up to trace his jawline with butterfly gentleness. Fear doesn't mean you're making the wrong choice. Sometimes it just means you care enough about the outcome to be afraid. Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, the touch sending electricity through his nervous system. I'm scared too, Marcus. Terrified that I'll mess this up like I've messed up every relationship before. That I'll retreat into work or control issues or any of the 1,000 defense mechanisms I've perfected. But for the first time in my life, I want to try anyway, because the possibility of being with you matters more than the certainty of being alone. He kissed her then properly this time, without 9-year-olds or nightmares to interrupt. Elena melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. She tasted like hope and possibility, like everything he'd thought he'd lost when Nora died, but somehow found again in the least expected place. The kiss deepened years of loneliness and careful distance, evaporating in the heat between them. And Marcus understood with absolute clarity that this was what he'd been missing. Not just romance or physical connection, but the feeling of being truly seen and chosen by someone who understood exactly what they were signing up for. They pulled apart eventually, breathless and grinning like teenagers, the sunset painting, everything in shades of gold and rose. Elena's hair had come loose from its ponytail, her lips swollen from kissing, and Marcus thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful. She leaned her forehead against his, both of them catching their breath in the charged silence. I should tell you something. Her voice was low, intimate, in a way that had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with trust. I haven't felt this alive in years, maybe ever, and that's entirely because of you. Before Marcus could respond, his phone erupted with Harper's ringtone, the specific pattern that meant emergency rather than casual check-in. He pulled it out with hands that had suddenly gone cold, the warmth from moments before vanishing under familiar dread. Marcus, Declan can't breathe properly. I've already called 911. Harper's voice carried that terrible calm that came from needing to hold things together when panic wanted to take over. We're heading to OHSU now. Everything else ceased to matter. Marcus was moving before conscious thought caught up Elena beside him, matching his pace as they ran for her car in the parking lot. She drove with the same focused intensity she'd shown before, phone already at her ear, calling ahead to Dr. Walsh, pulling strings and making things happen, while Marcus sat frozen in the passenger seat, trying not to imagine the worst. The hospital swallowed them again. Bright lights and antiseptic smells, and that particular quality of controlled chaos that characterized emergency rooms. Declan was already in a treatment bay when they arrived, oxygen mask covering the lower half of his face, his eyes frightened in a way that broke Marcus's heart. Harper stood beside the bed, looking pale and shaken, and Dr. Walsh was reviewing monitors with the grim expression of someone delivering news no one wanted to hear. This is the third severe attack in 6 months, Marcus. The doctor's words were gentle but unyielding. The conventional treatments aren't managing his condition anymore. We need to talk about more aggressive options. Elena appeared at Marcus's elbow, her presence steadying him when everything felt like it was spinning out of control. He listened as Dr. Walsh explained biologic medications that cost thousands of dollars, monthly research programs in Seattle that might provide access to cutting-edge treatments, the reality that Declan's asthma had progressed beyond what Portland's medical facilities could optimally manage. Every word was another brick in a wall, pushing them toward decisions Marcus had been trying to avoid. I can help. Elena's voice cut through his paralysis. I have connections, resources. No. The word came out harsher than intended, sharp edges of pride and fear making it a weapon. No more charity. I can't keep letting you save us. Elena flinched, actually stepped back like he'd struck her physically. Dr. Walsh tactfully excused herself to check other patients, leaving them in a privacy that felt more like exposure. Marcus knew he was being irrational, knew Elena's offer came from genuine care rather than pity, but the weight of everything, job loss, medical crises, emotional entanglement, pressed down until he could barely breathe. This isn't charity, Marcus. I care about Declan. I care about you. Her voice shook slightly, control slipping. Why is it so hard for you to let someone help? Because everything in my life right now came from someone else's planning. The words exploded out, too loud for a hospital, but impossible to contain. My job because Nora pulled strings. Declan's previous treatments because you arranged them. This new position in Seattle because you offered it. When do I get to stand on my own 2 feet instead of being the charity case everyone feels obligated to fix? The hurt that flashed across Elena's face was immediate and devastating, but she held her ground. You think I'm with you out of obligation? That I spent the last week falling for you because my father made a promise to your wife? Her voice rose to match his professional veneer, cracking completely. I offered you that job because you're exceptional at what you do, because the salary is standard for VP positions in our industry, because I trust you to care about building something meaningful. And I'm helping Declan because I love him. Because I love you. The declaration hung between them, raw and unplanned, precisely the worst possible timing in a hospital corridor, with his son struggling to breathe 20 feet away. Marcus opened his mouth closed. It had no idea what to say to that when his entire world was actively imploding. I can't do this right now. Each word felt like it was being dragged out of him. I need to focus on Declan, on making sure my son survives this without drowning in medical debt or uprooting his entire life because I can't provide what he needs. Elena's expression shuddered that CEO mask sliding back into place as protective armor against the damage his words had inflicted. Of course, your son comes first, as he should. She stepped back, creating physical distance that felt like miles. I'll go, give you space with Declan. Marcus watched her walk away and didn't call her back even as every instinct screamed that he was making a catastrophic mistake. He turned instead to his son's room where Declan's monitors beeped their steady rhythm, and Harper waited with questions he had no ability to answer. Saturday morning brought Declan's discharge papers and the particular exhaustion that came from hospital nights spent in uncomfortable chairs. Marcus signed forms with mechanical precision, his mind still replaying the fight with Elena, the look on her face when he'd essentially rejected her declaration of love in the worst possible moment. Harper drove them home in silence that felt judgmental despite her best efforts at neutrality, and by the time they reached the house, Marcus's phone showed 17 unanswered texts to Elena and 3 calls that had gone straight to voicemail. Declan settled into the couch with his nebulizer treatments and favorite blanket, looking small, but significantly better than 12 hours ago. Harper made breakfast. Nobody ate, then finally broke her diplomatic silence. You're an idiot. No heat in the words, just statement of observable fact. That woman told you she loved you, and you threw it back in her face because accepting help threatens your pride. Marcus couldn't argue with accurate assessments, so he didn't try. Instead, he pulled out his phone again, typed another message that felt inadequate, deleted it unsent. Elena had vanished completely, her social media dormant, her assistant's auto-reply indicating she was unavailable until further notice. It was like she'd erased herself from accessibility, and Marcus couldn't blame her even as panic clawed at his throat. Where would she go? The question was rhetorical, directed more at the universe than his sister. If you just had your heart broken by someone too stupid to see what was right in front of him, where would you hide? Harper considered this seriously, her teacher's brain working through human behavior patterns. Somewhere meaningful, somewhere connected to what she lost. She paused. Her father's office, maybe. You said she was closing down Crawford Technologies. If she's processing everything, she might go where she can still feel close to him. It made sense in a way Marcus wished it didn't. Elena seeking comfort in the remnants of her father's legacy, surrounded by the company she'd failed to save, alone with grief that must feel overwhelming right now. He checked his watch, barely past 9 on a Saturday morning, which meant the office building would be mostly empty, security minimal for weekend access. Declan looked up from his breathing treatment, those 2 perceptive eyes reading his father's face with uncomfortable accuracy. You're going to find her right to say sorry for being scared. Not accusatory, just checking facts. Because she's probably really sad right now. And when I'm saying I want someone to come find me. The simple wisdom of 9-year-olds cut through every rationalization Marcus had been constructing. He kissed Declan's forehead, confirmed Harper would stay as long as needed, and headed out into Portland's gray morning with purpose that felt simultaneously urgent and terrifying. Crawford Technologies occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that had seen better decades, the architecture stuck somewhere between ambitious modernism and dated functionality. Saturday security waved Marcus through with board recognition. He still had his access badge, termination not effective for another month, and the elevator carried him up to executive offices that felt haunted without their usual population. His footsteps echoed on polished floors as he navigated toward Robert Crawford's corner office, following instinct and hope in equal measure. Elena sat amid cardboard boxes and memories, surrounded by her father's books and awards, and the accumulated evidence of a life dedicated to building something that hadn't survived him. She'd been crying, that much was obvious from red-rimmed eyes and the tissue clutched in one hand, but she'd stopped when Marcus appeared in the doorway. Now she just looked exhausted, wrung out like someone who'd used up their capacity for emotion and had nothing left. How did you know I'd be here? Marcus stepped into the office carefully, like approaching something wild that might bolt. Harper's intuition. And the fact that I've spent the last 8 hours realizing I'm an idiot who let pride and fear destroy the best thing that's happened to me in 4 years. Elena's laugh was bitter, devoid of actual humor. You're allowed to have boundaries, Marcus. You're allowed to not want someone swooping in to fix your problems with money and connections. She gestured at the boxes surrounding her. I've been controlling things my whole life, trying to solve everything by force of will and resources. Maybe you were right to push back. I wasn't right. Marcus moved closer, drawn by the defeat in her voice that felt fundamentally wrong for someone as strong as Elena. I was scared and overwhelmed and lashing out at the person trying to help, because accepting that help meant admitting I can't do everything alone. But Deck is right, love isn't complicated. People make it complicated by being cowards. Something flickered in Elena's expression, not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of it. Your son said that, more or less, 9-year-olds have a way of cutting through bullshit adults wrap themselves in. Marcus sat on one of the boxes, making himself vulnerable by meeting her at her level rather than looming. Elena, I'm sorry for rejecting what you offered, for making you feel like your feelings were obligation instead of choice, for being too broken to see that sometimes accepting help is the brave thing, not the weak thing. Elena set down her tissue, hands folding in her lap with deliberate care. I've been sitting here trying to figure out who I am without the company, without the CEO title, without the constant pressure to live up to my father's expectations. Her gaze drifted to a photo on the desk, Robert Crawford in younger years before tragedy had shaped him. And I realized something. I don't want to be that person anymore. The one who fixes everything by controlling it, who measures worth in quarterly earnings and successful negotiations. Marcus waited, sensing this was important beyond just their relationship. I'm not going to Seattle, at least not to start Crawford Solutions. The words didn't immediately compute. The job offer, the business plan, the future they'd been tentatively building, all of it contingent on Elena's new company. What are you talking about? Elena pulled out her phone, showed him emails exchanged over the past 12 hours while he'd been spiraling in hospital quarters. The venture capital funding for Crawford Solutions, I redirected it to research grants for medical AI development. There's a nonprofit called MedTech Futures in Seattle that's doing incredible work on diagnostic systems, and they need operational leadership more than I need to build another empire. Her fingers traced the edge of her phone. I'm joining them. Smaller salary, zero prestige, actual meaningful work instead of just profitable work. Marcus processed this fundamental shift the way Elena had essentially dismantled the entire plan she'd presented a week ago. But the job offer, MedTech Futures is hiring. VP of Technology position, very similar to what I was going to offer you. Elena met his eyes directly. I gave them your name and work history. They looked you up independently, were impressed by what they found, and want to interview you. This isn't me pulling strings, Marcus. This is me pointing qualified people toward each other and letting them make their own decisions. The distinction mattered enormously, the difference between obligation and opportunity crystallizing in a way that made Marcus's chest tighten. Elena wasn't trying to control or fix or manipulate. She was stepping back, offering information and possibility, then trusting him to choose for himself. You gave up your company plan. Not a question, just trying to grasp the magnitude of what she'd done. Everything you'd been working toward since the sale went through. I gave up pretending I wanted to be my father. Elena's voice was steady now, some of her natural confidence returning. I've spent 2 years trying to save his legacy, then another week planning to rebuild it in different form. But that was never my dream, Marcus. It was his, and I was so desperate to make him proud that I forgot to ask what would make me happy. The honesty of it stripped away every defense Marcus had left. This was what courage actually looked like, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to burn down everything familiar in pursuit of something authentic. Elena was offering him the same choice, the same freedom to define success on terms that mattered to him rather than metrics inherited from others. I want to interview. The decision felt right in a way few things had recently. I want to move to Seattle, get Declan into that research program, Dr. Walsh mentioned work on something that actually helps people instead of just generating shareholder value. He paused. And I want to do it with you. Not because of job offers or medical access or anything practical, but because I love you and I'm tired of being too scared to admit it. Elena's control finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as something like relief transformed her expression. I love you too. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. She wiped at her eyes impatiently. I'm probably going to mess this up. I'll retreat into work when things get hard or try to solve emotional problems with logistics or any of the thousand dysfunctional coping mechanisms I've perfected. But I want to try anyway because being with you feels like the first honest thing I've done in years. Marcus crossed the space between them, pulling Elena up from her position among the boxes and into an embrace that felt like coming home. She melted against him, face buried in his shoulder, and he held her while she cried out weeks of accumulated stress and grief and exhaustion. When she finally pulled back, red-eyed but smiling, he kissed her with all the certainty he should have shown yesterday, instead of letting fear dictate his responses. So we're doing this. Elena's hands framed his face, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. Seattle and nonprofit work and building a life together, despite having no idea if we're any good at relationships. We're doing this. Marcus's conviction surprised him with its strength. Deck needs better medical care than Portland can provide, and I need work that matters, and we both need you. It's terrifying and illogical, and probably the smartest decision I've made since saying yes when Nora agreed to marry me. They spent another hour in Robert's office, Elena finishing the work of packing away her father's professional life, while Marcus made plans on his phone. He scheduled the interview with MedTech Futures for Wednesday, coordinated with Dr. Walsh about Seattle Children's Hospital referrals, texted Harper that he'd found Elena, and everything was going to be okay. The practical actions grounded him, gave structure to decisions that felt momentous, but also inevitable, like they'd been moving toward this conclusion from the moment Elena had sat beside him at Finn's Irish pub. The next 6 weeks passed in a controlled chaos of interviews and medical appointments and packing accumulated years into boxes. Marcus got the job offer from MedTech Futures with terms that made his eyes widen, not quite the 40% increase Elena had promised with her own venture, but substantially better than Crawford Technologies, and weighted toward actual work-life balance. Declan got accepted into the Seattle Children's Research Program, his participation covering treatment costs, while contributing to understanding of severe pediatric asthma. The house went on the market sold within a week to a young family who promised to love it the way Marcus and Nora had. Elena helped pack her organizational skills, transforming what could have been overwhelming into manageable phases. Harper supervised with teacher efficiency, labeling boxes and making sure Marcus didn't accidentally donate irreplaceable memories. They worked together with surprising ease, the three of them forming a team that felt natural despite its recent formation. Elena learned that Marcus needed coffee before coherent conversation, that he kept Nora's jewelry in a specific drawer he couldn't quite bring himself to empty. Marcus learned that Elena stress-baked at midnight, that her apartment would fill with cookies and muffins whenever she felt overwhelmed by decisions. The cemetery visit came 2 days before the move. Portland's afternoon sun filtering through old trees as Marcus and Declan stood at Nora's grave with flowers that would wilt before anyone returned to tend them. The headstone was simple, elegant, exactly what she would have chosen if she'd had the energy to plan her own funeral. Marcus knelt in the grass, one hand on cool marble, and tried to find words adequate for goodbye. We're leaving Nora, moving to Seattle so Declan can get better treatment, so I can do work that matters, so we can. His voice broke, and Declan's hand found his shoulder with surprising strength for someone so young. So we can be happy, Mom, like you wanted. Declan's voice was steady, wise beyond his years, in the way children forced to understand mortality too young often were. Elena's coming with us. She's not trying to be you, but she loves us and we love her, and I think you'd be okay with that. Marcus pulled his son close, both of them crying now, grief and gratitude tangling until they were indistinguishable. Nora had planned for this, had arranged pieces knowing she wouldn't be there to see them fall into place. And her final gift had been trusting strangers to care for the family she'd had to leave behind. The weight of that trust settled into Marcus's bones, not as obligation, but as permission. Permission to move forward, to find happiness again, to let Declan see his father as something more than just a widower marking time until death made them even. Thank you. Marcus pressed his palm against the headstone, cool despite summer heat. For everything. For loving us enough to plan ahead, for trusting Robert and Elena to keep their promises, for not making me choose between honoring your memory and building a future. I'll never forget you, but I'm going to live again. Really live the way you always wanted me to. They left flowers and tears and headed back to the car where Elena waited, giving them privacy, but present enough that returning didn't feel like abandonment. She held Marcus when he broke down completely, stood strong while he fell apart, and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make any of it easier. Some griefs never healed, just became integrated into who you were afterward. Seattle welcomed them with characteristic rain, the moving truck arriving at their new rental house in a neighborhood chosen for proximity to both Declan's school and medical facilities. The place was bigger than what they'd left behind, 3 bedrooms, plus an office that Marcus would use for remote workdays. Elena had found it negotiated the lease, but made sure Marcus signed the papers because this was his home first, hers only by invitation. She had her own apartment 10 minutes away, maintaining separate spaces while they figured out how living in the same city worked without the complications of employment hierarchy. Marcus's first date at MedTech Futures confirmed everything the interview process had suggested. The work was challenging in ways that engaged rather than exhausted him, focused on developing AI systems that could detect cancer earlier and more accurately than current methods. His team was small but brilliant, passionate about impact over profits, and they accepted him based on his ideas rather than questioning his credentials. Within 2 weeks, he'd earned respect through competence, and the gossip about getting hired through girlfriend connections faded into irrelevance. Declan thrived in ways that stunned Marcus. The new school challenged him academically. The medical treatments actually controlled his asthma for the first time in years, and having Elena as a constant presence seemed to provide stability. Marcus hadn't realized his son was missing. They fell into routines that felt like family dinners twice a week at Marcus's place, weekend outings to Seattle's parks and museums, Elena teaching Declan about neural networks, while Marcus cooked meals that brought them all together. 3 months into their Seattle life, Declan asked the question Marcus had been simultaneously expecting and dreading. When is Elena going to be my mom? They were doing homework at the kitchen table, Marcus helping with math problems, while Declan worked through vocabulary, and the question landed with the casual devastation only children could achieve. Marcus set down his pencil, buying time to formulate a response that wouldn't make promises he couldn't guarantee. That's a big question, buddy. Why are you asking? Declan looked up from his worksheet, expression serious. Because she does mom things. She helps with homework and comes to my doctor appointments and knows when I'm swaying without me saying anything. And you look at her the way you used to look at mom in old pictures, like she's the best thing in the world. A pause, then quieter. I know she's not mom, but she could be like a mom, right? And other kids have stepmoms. I want Elena to be mine. The longing in his son's voice was almost too much to bear. Marcus had been so focused on his own fears about rushing into something about potentially hurting Declan if the relationship failed that he'd missed his son actively wishing for exactly what Marcus was afraid to pursue. Elena had become essential to both of them, woven into daily life until her absence would leave holes that couldn't be filled by anyone else. Would you be okay if I asked Elena to marry me? Declan's face split into a grin that answered more eloquently than words ever could. For the rest of the evening, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it, turning the idea over and examining it from every angle. 6 months since that night at Finn's Irish pub, less than 4 months in Seattle, and he was seriously contemplating proposing to someone he'd once thought of as just his boss. But it didn't feel rushed when measured against what they'd built together, trust and partnership, and genuine affection that went beyond simple attraction. That night, after Declan was asleep, Marcus called Elena. Can we talk? Really talk about where this is going? They met at her apartment, neutral territory that let them both feel comfortable. Elena had been baking again, the scent of chocolate chip cookies filling the space, and she offered him one while they settled onto her couch with the careful distance of people about to have a significant conversation. I love you. Marcus started there because everything else built from that foundation. I love the way you are with Declan, the way you challenge me to be better, the way you've built a life around meaning instead of just success. And I want a future with you, not someday when we figured everything out, but now while we're still learning each other. Elena's hand found his fingers interlacing with practiced ease. I love you too, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. Her voice was steady despite the emotion underneath. But Marcus, we're talking about something permanent. Marriage, blending families, all the complicated reality that comes with that. Are you sure you're ready? He wasn't sure of anything except that being without her felt fundamentally wrong. I'm sure that every day with you is better than any day without you. I'm sure Declan needs someone who cares about him the way you do, and I need a partner who sees me as something more than just a father doing his best. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. They talked for hours, mapping out futures and acknowledging fears and building the foundation that would support whatever came next. Elena admitted she was terrified of being someone's mother figure, of not living up to expectations, or somehow damaging Declan despite her best intentions. Marcus confessed his lingering guilt about moving on from Nora, about whether 4 years was enough time or if he should have waited longer. They were both scared and uncertain and choosing each other anyway because the alternative, safety and isolation, felt like dying slowly instead of actually living. Christmas came with unexpected joy, the first since Nora's death that didn't feel hollow. Harper visited for a week, bringing her particular brand of no-nonsense affection and endless questions about Seattle life. They decorated Marcus's house together, Declan insisting on a tree that touched the ceiling and enough lights to be visible from space. Elena joined them for Christmas Eve dinner, and Declan presented her with a drawing he'd been working on for weeks, the three of them holding hands under Seattle's skyline labeled, "Our Family," in careful block letters. Elena cried, actually cried, holding the drawing like it was precious beyond measure. "Can I keep this forever?" Declan nodded solemnly. "Your family now. Of course you can keep it." New Year's Eve found Marcus and Elena alone, Declan staying with Harper for a special overnight that both women had clearly conspired to arrange. They spent the evening at Elena's apartment, cooking dinner together and talking about everything that had changed in 12 months. A year ago, Elena had been drowning in her father's company, while Marcus had been surviving rather than living. Now they had meaningful work and healthy relationships and the terrifying possibility of genuine happiness. "Best year of my life." Lena's head rested on Marcus's shoulder as they watched the city lights from her balcony. "Which is insane because I lost the company and moved cities and completely rebuilt everything I thought I knew about myself. But it's true anyway." Marcus pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in the jasmine scent he'd come to associate with home. "Mine too, and next year's going to be even better." Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and decision time. Marcus bought a ring simple and elegant because Elena wasn't someone who needed ostentatious displays of wealth to feel valued. The diamond was modest but flawless, set in platinum that would last lifetimes. He carried it for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment that kept not arriving until he realized there was no perfect moment. There was just right now and the choice to be brave. He planned a quiet evening dinner at Elena's favorite restaurant, a walk through the sculpture park. She loved something romantic and memorable. But the day he'd chosen, Elena called mid-morning with distress in her voice. "I need to see you. Can you come over? I can't do this on the phone." Panic seized him immediately. She was sick. She'd changed her mind. Something terrible had happened, and she needed to break difficult news in person. Marcus arranged for Harper to pick up Declan from school, drove to Elena's apartment with his heart in his throat and the ring burning a hole in his pocket. Elena looked wrecked when she opened the door, eyes red from crying, still in pajamas at noon on a Thursday. She'd clearly been up all night, exhaustion and distress written across every feature. "I've been seeing a therapist." The words tumbled out before Marcus could ask what was wrong. "Since we moved to Seattle, trying to work through my father's death and the company failure and all my dysfunctional relationship patterns." Marcus's chest tightened, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Okay, that's good, Elena. Therapy is healthy." She pointed something out this week that I can't stop thinking about. Elena's hands twisted together, nervous energy radiating off her. "That I have a pattern of jumping into relationships to fix myself, using other people as solutions to problems I should be addressing internally. And I'm terrified that's what I'm doing with you and Declan." The fear in her voice was genuine, raw, in a way that made Marcus want to comfort her even as his own anxiety spiked. "What are you saying?" "I don't know." She finally met his eyes, a tear streaming freely now. "I love you, I love Declan. But what if I'm using you both to fill the void from losing my father? What if I'm not actually ready for this and I'm going to hurt you both because I'm too broken to be what you need?" Marcus stepped closer, reaching for her hands and holding them despite their trembling. "Do you want to break up?" The question was hard to ask but necessary. "Is that what this is?" "No, God, no." Elena's response was immediate and vehement. I just need to know that I'm doing this for the right reasons, that I'm not repeating old patterns because they're comfortable even when they're unhealthy. Understanding bloomed slowly. This wasn't Elena pulling away. It was her being brave enough to question her own motivations to make sure she came to this relationship as a whole person rather than someone seeking completion through another. Marcus had been so worried about his own baggage, about whether he was ready to love again, that he'd missed Elena doing the same difficult work of examining her wounds before asking him to help carry them. I'm scared too. The admission felt necessary, important for her to know she wasn't alone in uncertainty. Every single day I'm terrified of losing you the way I lost Nora, of Declan getting attached, and then you leaving because I'm not enough, or our life together doesn't match whatever fantasy you built, of opening myself up to that kind of pain again and not surviving it this time. Lena's hands tightened in his. Then why are you still here? Because love is choosing despite fear. Because running from pain means running from joy too, and I'm done living half a life to avoid potential hurt. Marcus pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her jaw. You asked if you're doing this for the right reasons. Here's what I know. Every relationship you described from your past was about achievement and control, about proving yourself worthy of attention. But with me and Declan, you just are. You show up and bake cookies at midnight and teach a 9-year-old about space and let yourself cry when you're overwhelmed. That's not using us, that's letting us see you honestly. Something in Elena's expression cracked the fear, giving way to something that looked like hope. I want to choose you. I want to be sure I'm choosing you as a whole person, not as a broken one seeking repair. Her voice shook but held. I'm in therapy because I want to be healthy enough to deserve what we're building. Because you and Declan matter too much for me to bring my full dysfunction without at least trying to heal it first. The courage of that admission took Marcus's breath away. Elena wasn't running from their relationship. She was running toward being better for it, doing the hard work of examining her damage and addressing it before asking him to accept it. That was the opposite of every unhealthy pattern. She described, the antithesis of using someone to fix internal problems. You already deserve this. Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. Not because you're fixed or perfect or have all your issues resolved, but because you're trying, because you're brave enough to question yourself and do the work and show up honestly, even when it's terrifying. He paused, then made a decision that felt simultaneously impulsive and inevitable. And because I want to spend my life with you, therapy, revelations and all. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, watching Elena's eyes go wide as she realized what was happening. Dropping to one knee in her living room wasn't how he'd planned this, but plans had been overrated since the night she'd propositioned him in a bar. Elena Crawford, you're the bravest person I know. Not because you ran a company or saved your father's legacy or rebuilt your life from scratch, but because you're willing to face your fears, examine your flaws, and choose to grow instead of just surviving. His hands shook slightly as he opened the box. I want to spend my life learning with you, growing alongside you, choosing you every day the way you've chosen us. Will you marry me? Elena dropped to her knees in front of him, tears streaming as she laughed and cried simultaneously. Yes, oh my God, yes, 1,000 times yes. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, like it had been made for her hand specifically, and Marcus pulled her close for a kiss that tasted like tears and joy and the terrifying beauty of second chances. They stayed on the floor of her apartment, wrapped around each other, and Marcus felt the last pieces of his carefully guarded heart unlock. This was what he'd been missing, not safety or certainty, but the courage to risk everything for something real. A year later, Marcus stood in the backyard of the house he and Elena had bought together, watching guests mingle in late afternoon sunshine. The wedding had been exactly what they'd wanted: 30 people who mattered, a ceremony in their garden that took 20 minutes, vows that had everyone crying despite their brevity. Declan had been ring bearer with solemnity that made the adults smile, and when it came time for the traditional vows, he'd added his own. I promise to love you both and share my dad. Everyone had laughed through tears, the sentiment so perfectly Declan that it broke hearts and mended them simultaneously. Harper had been maid of honor. Elena's cousin had stood as best man, and afterward they'd eaten too much food and danced to music that spanned decades. It had been simple and perfect, and exactly the beginning Marcus hadn't known he was allowed to want. Now 6 months married, their house hummed with the kind of chaos that came from actually living rather than just occupying space. Declan was thriving, his asthma under control for the first time in years, his grades excellent, his circle of friends expanding weekly. Marcus's work remained challenging in the best ways, projects that mattered unfolding under his leadership. And Elena, his wife, was 3 months pregnant with a daughter who'd been planned and celebrated and already loved beyond measure. Dad, will my sister know about Mom? Declan's voice interrupted Marcus's thoughts, his son appearing beside him with the suddenness of children who move too fast to track. Marcus knelt to Declan's level, an automatic gesture that had become habit. Yes, we'll tell her all about Mom, how smart she was, how much she loved you, how she made sure we'd be okay, even after she was gone. Elena joined them, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly, and Declan immediately transferred his question to her. Will you tell her about Mom? Every story I know. Elena's voice was gentle but certain. Your mom was remarkable, Dec. The way she thought ahead and protected you and your dad, that's real love. And we get to honor her by being happy, by building the life she wanted for you. Declan considered this with the seriousness he brought to important matters, then delivered his verdict. I think Mom would like you, Elena. She'd be happy Dad picked someone brave and smart who knows about space. The assessment was so earnest, so full of 9-year-old wisdom, that both adults had to blink back sudden tears. Elena pulled Declan into a hug, fierce and protective, and Marcus watched his son and wife together and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. Nora had made this possible, had trusted strangers to care for her family, and they'd honored that trust beyond what anyone could have predicted. The afternoon faded toward evening, golden light painting everything in shades of contentment. Elena and Marcus stood together in their garden while Declan played with the boy they'd adopted last month. An energetic retriever who seemed to understand his job was keeping a 9-year-old entertained. Elena's hand found Marcus's fingers interlacing automatically, and she leaned against him with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd chosen each other repeatedly. A year ago today, did you imagine this? Her voice was soft, meant only for him. Never. A year ago, I was terrified of everything moving to Seattle, starting a new job, letting you close enough to matter. Marcus pressed a kiss to her temple. But I'm glad I took the risk. Glad I was brave enough to try. That night at the bar seems like it happened to different people. Elena laughed quietly. I can't believe I propositioned you like that. What was I thinking? You were thinking that sometimes you have to be brave enough to ask for what you want even when the timing is terrible. Marcus turned her to face him, both hands framing her face. You changed everything that night, took my carefully controlled life and upended it completely, and it was the best thing anyone's ever done for me. They kissed slowly, thoroughly, with the confidence of people who knew they had time to savor moments instead of rushing through them. When they pulled apart, Declan was calling for them to watch him teach the dog a new trick, and Elena smiled with uncomplicated joy. Duty calls. Best duty in the world. Marcus echoed her sentiment, and they walked toward their son together. The mail carrier's van pulled up just as they reached Declan, and Marcus recognized the overnight delivery service that handled important documents. The driver checked his clipboard, confirmed Marcus's identity, and handed over a package marked with law firm letterhead and specific delivery instructions to be opened on Marcus Sullivan and Elena Crawford's first wedding anniversary. They looked at each other, recognition dawning simultaneously. Elena's hand shook slightly as Marcus unsealed the envelope, pulling out papers in a letter in handwriting that made Elena gasp. Robert Crawford's precise script filled a single page dated 2 months before his death. If you're reading this, my hopes came true. Marcus, Nora told me about you before you ever met me. What a good man you are, how much you love your son, how you deserve opportunities to show what you're capable of. I kept my promise to her, and I hope you've forgiven me for interfering in your life. Elena, you've always been so driven, so afraid to need anyone after losing your mother. I worried you'd spend your life building empires instead of connections, achieving instead of living. I hoped you'd find each other, not because I planned it or manipulated circumstances, but because some people are meant to connect across grief and loss. You're both too stubborn to accept help easily, too proud to admit you need support, and too scared of vulnerability to let people in without a fight. Which means if you manage to overcome all that and choose each other, it's real. Love is the only thing that matters. Not companies or legacies or professional success, just love chosen freely and maintained bravely. Build a life on that foundation. Not obligation, not guilt, not fear of being alone, just love. I'm proud of you both. Live well. Marcus's vision blurred, reading the words through tears that wouldn't be contained. Elena was crying too, clutching the letter like it was precious beyond measure. And when they looked at each other, the grief and gratitude were so tangled they couldn't be separated. He knew, Elena's voice broke. He hoped but didn't force. Gave us space to find our own way. That was the real gift. Marcus pulled her close, the letter pressed between them. Not the job or the opportunity or even bringing us together. Just trusting us to be brave enough to choose this ourselves. Declan's voice interrupted their moment, high and insistent. Dad, Elena, come push me on the swing. The sunset's really pretty, and we should watch it together. The simple request grounded them, brought them back from emotion into the practical reality of being called to witness beauty by someone who noticed such things. Elena carefully folded the letter, tucking it into her pocket for safekeeping, and smiled at Marcus through her tears. He's right. Best duty in the world. They walked toward the swing set, hand in hand, and Marcus glanced back at the house. Nora's photograph visible through the living room window, where he kept it alongside more recent family pictures. He sent a silent thank you to the woman who'd loved him first, who'd trusted him to live fully after she was gone, who'd arranged pieces knowing the outcome, but leaving the actual choices to him. Declan's laughter filled the evening air, clear and joyful, the sound of a child who felt safe and loved and part of something bigger than himself. Marcus pushed the swing while Helena and Elena stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder and their daughter growing in her belly, and understood with crystalline clarity that this was what Nora had wanted. Not for him to forget her, but to remember while still moving forward. Not to replace what they'd had, but to build something new alongside those memories. The sun set in spectacular fashion. Seattle's skyline silhouetted against orange and purple sky, and Marcus Sullivan stood surrounded by his family, chosen and built and loved with intention, and felt more alive than he had in years. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and terrifying, and full of possibility, and he was finally brave enough to walk into it with open hands instead of clenched fists. Declan jumped from the swing at its highest point, launching himself through the air with the fearless confidence of children who trusted their parents to catch them. Marcus caught him easily, spinning him around until they both laughed, and when he set Declan down, his son immediately grabbed both his hand and Elena's, linking them together. Best family ever. Not a question, just statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. And standing there in the fading light, Marcus couldn't find any reason to disagree.